Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to, cut through all the noise and really get to the heart of some important ideas from the source material you've shared.
Exactly.
And today, we're diving into a really interesting book. It proposes a pretty radical rethink of education, especially for, well, the world we live in now, saturated with media. It's called Media Arts Education by Dane Olson.
Yeah, and when you hear media arts, maybe you think, oh, photography class, maybe video editing, something like that, an elective.
Right, just another class.
But Olson's idea is much, much bigger than that. He's positioning media arts not just as a subject, but as a whole new way almost to understand and even transform learning itself.
Okay, so not just what we learn, but how we learn it.
Precisely. And Dane Olson, he's not just some academic theorist, locked away somewhere. This guy has serious hands-on experience, over 35 years in media arts education.
Oh, wow, 35 years.
Yeah, teacher, curriculum specialist. He's currently the president of the National Association for Media Arts Education. NAME, they call it. He's consulted all over for states, different organizations. So he has this really deep, practical understanding of how education systems actually work. Or don't work, sometimes.
Okay, so he knows the theory and the practice.
Absolutely. And his book, Media Arts Education, he calls it an essential companion. And not just for arts teachers, which you might expect. No, he's talking to educators across, well, almost everything. Visual arts, sure, but also career tech, computer science, even STEM and STEAM. It's incredibly broad.
That is broad. So for this deep dive, our goal is really to unpack what Olson's core idea is. He's saying media arts education, let's call it MAE, maybe.
MAE. Yeah, that works.
Okay, so MAE isn't just something extra you tack onto the schedule. He sees it as a, what do you call it, a meta framework.
A meta framework, exactly. A foundational way to approach all education. And he argues it's fundamentally in sync with what he calls our society's nervous system.
Society's nervous system. Okay, that sounds big. We definitely need to unpack that one.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to explore how MAE, according to Olson, can maybe fix some of these really long-standing, deep problems in traditional education. And crucially, why it's maybe more important than ever for preparing you, the listener, to, well, navigate this incredibly complex digital future we're all in.
Yeah, and how it empowers you not just to consume information passively, but to actively get involved, understand things better, maybe even help shape the world a bit.
Right. So to really get why Olson's vision for MAE feels so potentially transformative, we kind of have to first face up to the issues in our current system, right?
Absolutely. Olson argues that traditional education, well, it's riddled with these fundamental problems, and they consistently get in the way of genuine learning. What's really striking, perhaps, is that these problems often come directly from how it was designed in the first place. It was never really built around how people, actually learn.
And he really doesn't mince words when he talks about this design, does he? He calls it the factory model.
The factory model, yes.
Think about that phrase, factory. It immediately makes you picture, industrial processes, standardization.
Conveyor belts.
Exactly. Efficiency, mass production. It's a powerful image, and it's really central to his whole critique.
It absolutely is. And one of the main issues, one we don't often even talk about, is what he calls total content retention, TCR.
TCR.
It's this implied idea, right, almost unspoken, that students have to retain 100% of everything they're taught in a class.
Which sounds ambitious, maybe impossible.
Well, it sounds maybe noble on the surface, like ensuring thorough knowledge.
Yeah.
But Olson points out the huge flaw. We rarely even measure this effectively. And the research, it's pretty stark. Studies consistently show students forget, get this, up to 80% of information within just a few weeks of learning it in a typical way.
80%. Seriously, that's most of it.
Most of it, just gone. Imagine spending hours and hours learning something and then poof, it vanishes. So this makes TCR, as Olson puts it, a futile and inferior educational objective.
Futile and inferior. Wow.
It's like designing a factory to make a perfect product, knowing full well 80% of it will just evaporate off the line. It really makes you ask, what are we even trying to achieve here if that's the outcome?
That 80% figure is just staggering. It really undermines the whole idea of efficiency in that factory model. And Olson hammers home that this system, it wasn't an accident, it was designed this way. Back in the late 1800s up to the 1950s.
Deliberately designed.
Yeah, and he quotes this guy, Elwood Cubberley, a big education leader back in 1909. And Cubberley bluntly calls schools factories in which the raw products, children, are to be shaped and fashioned.
Chilling, isn't it?
It really is. Raw products on a conveyor belt, moving through presentations, rooms, tests, grades. It wasn't just a metaphor. It was literally the blueprint.
And this industrial legacy, it created what Olson calls an unyielding, standardizing machine. It demands compliance from every single student. Doesn't matter what your background is, how you learn best, what you're naturally interested in. None of that.
One size fits all.
Pretty much. And the whole system is locked in place by just countless layers of laws, policies, bureaucracies, even union contracts. It makes it incredibly rigid, incredibly resistant to any real change. Think about it, the whole operation, from how teachers deliver content to how students are supposed to retain it, all the support structures like testing, attendance, schedules. It was all designed to work like clockwork.
Like a machine.
Exactly. And maybe it was an advance back then, giving basic literacy for factory jobs, but those interlocking parts make real systemic change now seem almost impossible. It's like we're stuck with this relic in a world that's changing incredibly fast.
And inside that rigid factory, the main focus isn't really on you, the student, is it? It's not about your unique learning journey. Olson says it's inherently content and teacher-centered.
Right. The priority is on the purity, the perfection of delivering the content, just getting the information out there. Olson points out how teachers are often completely overloaded, trying to cover like 120 hours of seat time worth of content for every single subject.
120 hours per subject. That's immense pressure.
It is. And it leads to what he calls rushed, superficial forms of coverage. There's just no time for real student interaction, for deep dives. It's all top-down, assuming that learning just happens by listening to the teacher, not by actually doing things, figuring things out, constructing your own understanding.
Which just seems like a pretty flawed assumption about learning.
Deeply flawed. And it inevitably leads to these glaring systemic failures and biases. Olson says the most undeniable proof that this factory model just isn't working is its own measurement tool. Those high-stakes standardized tests.
The tests.
Yeah. They consistently show that the majority of students don't reach proficiency. Not even in the basics, like reading, writing, math. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, for instance, shows fewer than 40% of graduating seniors actually master these core subjects.
Less than 40%. So they're leaving school not really prepared for college or, just life and work.
Profoundly ill-equipped, Olson argues. And here's where it gets really interesting and frankly pretty sobering. He highlights this inarguable finding. Students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, students of color, they consistently fare significantly worse on these tests.
It's achievement gap.
Exactly. And it's a gap that has remained mostly unchanged over the past half century. Think about that. Half a century of trying, and the gap persists. And there's this striking research from Maroon and Tinken in 2024.
What did they find?
They found they could predict, with 75% accuracy, how students would do on these high-stakes tests based only on their demographics, their background.
Wait, 75% accuracy just from demographics? That doesn't sound like it's measuring learning at all.
It's a pretty powerful indictment, isn't it? It strongly suggests these tests are often measuring things like your cultural background, how familiar you are with the specific language they use, maybe even just your disposition to sit still and follow instructions in that particular testing environment. Not really your true learning ability or how you can apply knowledge in new situations.
So the tests themselves might be part of the problem.
Olson certainly argues that. He concludes this whole factory model was never actually designed around a coherent theory of learning. It operates, he says, on a Cartesian metaphor.
Cartesian, like Descartes. Mind separate from body.
Exactly that. The brain as the separate, isolated machine. And this leads to learning that's mostly rote memorization, very narrow, focused on short-term recall. It just doesn't prepare students for the dynamic, unpredictable workforce of the 21st century. It creates passive learners with weak problem-solving skills, and that has huge costs for society.
Okay, so if traditional education is built on this flawed factory model, this sort of machine-like view of the brain, Olson wants us to completely rethink how learning actually works, right? Down to the biological level.
Yes, he challenges us to look at the biological foundations of embodied learning. It's a total paradigm shift.
Embodied learning. So learning involves the whole body, not just the brain in isolation.
That's the core idea. It forces us to reevaluate these really deep-seated, almost naive assumptions we have about thinking, about cognition. And yeah, these trace back historically, especially to René Descartes.
I think, therefore, I am.
The famous line, asserting that clear separation, mind distinct from and superior to the body. The mind is this pure calculation engine, untainted by messy physical stuff like emotions or sensations. That idea just permeated Western thought for centuries.
The classic mind-body split. But Olson and the science he draws on embodied cognition, they're saying that's just wrong.
Fundamentally wrong. Embodied cognition argues there is no gap. There's no neat separation between our brain wiring and our mind, our conscious experience. Research just overwhelmingly shows that the brain systems for action, for emotion, for motivation, for thinking, they are all thoroughly interconnected.
So feeling and thinking aren't separate processes.
Not at all. People like Mordiner, Yang, and Damasio have shown really convincingly that emotions aren't just side effects. They play out in the body and mind and are profoundly intertwined with thought. Any teacher knows this, right? Strong emotions like fear or anxiety, they can completely shut down learning.
Yeah, if you're scared or stressed, you can't focus.
Exactly. If students face repeated failure or humiliation or just boredom, they can become literally repulsed by school. It shows just how inseparable our emotional states and our cognitive abilities really are. Learning isn't just in our heads, it's an experience of our whole being.
In this old mechanistic view, the Cartesian view, it also kind of downgraded things like beauty, feelings, aesthetics.
Absolutely. Olson calls it the demotion of aesthetics. If the universe is just a machine and pure analysis only cares about quantifiable data, then subjective phenomena, things like colors, sounds, beauty, ethics, sensory feelings, they were seen as like polluting purity.
Polluting purity, that's harsh.
It is. They just got pushed aside in serious analysis. Mark Johnson, a philosopher Olson refers to a lot, argues that aesthetics is actually fundamental to human meaning. But he says we neglect it partly because these embodied aesthetic dimensions are kind of invisible in daily life. We see through our senses. We don't usually stop to think about our senses while we're experiencing things.
That makes sense. We just experience the world.
Great. And this natural self-concealment, as Johnson calls it, allowed the body's importance to be overlooked. And so the arts often get treated as unimportant, impractical, even non-cognitive. They're always the first things cut, right?
Sadly, yes.
But Olson, like John Dewey before him, forcefully argues against this. He says the arts are prime examples of human meaning-making, and they're absolutely vital for full cognitive development and deep understanding.
Okay, so learning isn't just detached brain stuff. It's rooted in our whole organism interacting with the world, which takes us beyond homeostasis, the drive to thrive. That sounds more active than just surviving.
It really shifts the perspective. Biologically speaking, cognition and learning, as systems theorists Capra and Luisi define it, it's basically the interaction of the whole organism with its environment. When an organism modifies its behavior based on experience, that is learning.
Even simple organisms.
Even microorganisms. Damasio, in his book The Strange Order of Things, shows how even bacteria have sophisticated ways to perceive and respond to their environment. They demonstrate this biological intelligence without needing complex brains. It shows learning is just a fundamental adaptive process of life itself, a universal thing for living systems.
Wow, okay, so even bacteria learn, but you said it goes beyond just survival, beyond homeostasis, which is just maintaining balance, right?
Exactly. Homeostasis is about keeping that internal balance. But Damasio introduces this deeper, more primordial idea, indomitable intention.
Indomitable intention. Sounds powerful.
It is. It's not just about staying stable. It's an intrinsic dynamic force in all life to upregulate itself toward a surplus of energy, to actively thrive, not just get by. It's this fundamental drive to optimize energy, to flourish, to perpetuate into the future. You see it in every cell, in our whole body as a system, even in human groups, creating culture, always striving for growth, for better functioning.
And this leads to Olson's really provocative idea about students.
Yeah, this is a big one. He asserts, it is less that all students can learn, but rather all students learn, period, as a de facto requirement of their biological being.
Whoa. So learning isn't optional, it's just happening, like breathing.
Pretty much. It fundamentally changes the whole conversation. This intrinsic drive to adapt, coupled with our brain's built-in reward system, that pleasure you get from figuring something out, from mastering a skill, it means that even students who look resistant or checked out in a traditional classroom, they are learning. They're learning something driven by their own interests, their own goals, their own indomitable intention.
So the problem isn't if students learn, but what and how they're learning in that traditional setting.
Exactly. The issue is whether those traditional classrooms, with their rigid pace, their top-down methods, their massive amounts of decontextualized information, are actually constraining this natural biological process. Are they shutting it down instead of inviting it, facilitating it, supporting it? Our current system often just underestimates students' innate drive and intelligence.
Okay. So learning is biological, it's embodied, it's driven by this urge to thrive. How does media arts MAE fit in? Olson calls it our society's techno-sensorimotor system. That's a huge claim. How does he back that up?
It sounds huge, but he builds a strong case. First, just the sheer ubiquity, the undeniable importance of media arts today. Stephen Levine from CalArts, he said, media arts is coming to define the arts of our time. It's not optional anymore. It's integral to daily life. It actively shapes our global digital society. It's become our primary means of communication, design, and interaction.
Like the internet itself.
Exactly. The internet is basically a vast interconnected system of media arts, interfaces, platforms, productions. Think about how much of our social life, our professional life, happens through screens, sound, digital images.
It's everywhere. And Olson isn't just talking about watching cat videos, right? He calls MAE the new interactive, multimodal, and interdimensional textbook across all subjects, the new textbook.
Yeah, think about these stats he uses. 86% of Americans get news digitally, and another 86% use YouTube specifically for learning.
86% learning on YouTube, that's massive.
It shows a fundamental societal shift in how people access and process information. Olson argues that ignoring media arts now is like ignoring textbooks back when the printing press was invented. It's just willfully ignoring the primary literacy of our time.
Wow, okay.
He describes MAE as this electronic, aesthetically processing overlay to all human experience. It uses all our senses, all forms of expression, and potentially unlocks limitless creativity and communication. It's, and I'm quoting here, our interconnectivity as well as our collective imaginations and consciousness externalized and distributed.
Externalized and distributed consciousness. That sounds almost like McLuhan. Media as extensions of man.
Very much echoes McLuhan. It suggests a complete transformation in how we interact with and understand everything. Media arts is how society perceives and interacts now, Olson argues. It's our techno-sensorimotor system.
Okay, that's a powerful framing, but
yeah.
The elephant in the room, AI. The AI revolution. We hear constantly about disruption, copyright chaos, jobs lost, maybe even AI taking over creative work. How does Olson see MAE fitting into this AI-driven world? Is it threatened?
It's a huge question, obviously. But Olson is actually remarkably optimistic about AI's role in education. He acknowledges the disruption, for sure, AI trained on existing stuff, the copyright mess, the potential for AI to churn out basic scripts or images. But he sees AI primarily as a powerful tool for education.
A tool? How so?
He thinks AI will be fantastic as a personal tutor. Imagine AI giving students immediate feedback, helping with basic research, providing technical assistance, like Conmigo.ai is already starting to do. And beyond that, AI can help manage these complex educational systems, making them more flexible, more personalized, maybe more equitable, by handling administrative stuff and tailoring content.
So AI doesn't replace the human element, but supports it, especially in MAE.
That's exactly his argument. He says MAE is further advanced and strengthened by AI because MAE maintains the vital human role in things like creativity, imagination, critical media analysis, ethical thinking. These uniquely human things, he argues, are absolutely imperative for societal cohesion and functioning, especially in an AI world.
So AI can generate stuff, but humans bring the meaning, the aesthetics, the ethics.
Precisely. Human aesthetic synthesis, original composition, ethical judgment. Olson believes these remain superior and irreplaceable. And interestingly, the latest AI research, like Google's natively multimodal Gemini, actually confirms Olson's core argument about the multimodal embodied basis of human thinking. It reinforces MAE's importance. AI becomes this incredibly powerful extension of our human capabilities, not a replacement for them.
Okay, that leads us right into multimodal cognition and aesthetic empathy. Olson goes deep here, right? Back to how you make sense of the world, even before words, starting with movement.
Yeah, Mark Johnson's work is key here again. Johnson explains that movement is the primordial foundation for how we interact with our environment. As we move, as we explore, we form these basic patterns he calls image schemas.
Image schemas, like what?
Things like up, down, in, out, near, far, force resistance. But they're not just visual concepts. They include direction, speed, energy, these really basic body-based conceptual structures. They bridge our senses directly to abstract thinking. Lakoff and Johnson argue that all abstract concepts are fundamentally primarily metaphorical, rooted in these physical experiences.
So abstract thought isn't abstract at all. It's grounded in the body.
That's the idea. Think about how we talk. I'm looking forward to seeing you, or we're moving forward on the project. Progress is movement. Our thinking is literally shaped by our physical being in the world.
That makes sense. And this starts super early, right? You mentioned even babies before language.
Absolutely. Olson highlights this fascinating research on babies. They develop these supramodal frameworks, meaning frameworks that cross different senses almost mindlessly before language kicks in. They do it through mimicking, through mutual gaze, tracking where others look. They learn basic concepts like space, causality, even social cues just by mirroring actions and experiencing the world through multiple senses at once.
So they're not figuring it out intellectually, they're just perceiving it directly.
Directly perceived, as Trevathan puts it. It's supported by things like mirror neuron theory, the idea that just watching or imagining an action activates the same brain parts as doing it. This suggests that understanding, even complex stuff, is a form of embodied simulation. We understand by kind of internally reenacting or simulating the experience.
And this empathy, this simulation, it's not just for other people. Olson says it extends to the whole world. Humans and the world.
Yeah, this is a really expansive idea. Olson argues we develop this multimodal empathy for basically any phenomenon we perceive. The rhythm of waves, the feeling of a crowded street, the way branches sway. We connect with it on a sensory embodied level.
Like feeling the energy of a place.
Exactly. And Ellen DeSanayak, in her work Homo Aestheticus, connects this to evolution. She argues making and appreciating art aesthetics is a fundamental human drive tied to our survival. So this means aesthetic empathy is fundamental to making meaning. Aesthetics becomes the foundation of any profound understanding of meaning and thought.
And because MAE deals with all forms of aesthetics using multiple senses.
Olson says it's the only logical means to really integrate this fundamental aspect of human cognition into education. It connects directly with how we naturally make sense of everything around us.
Okay, so this brings us to multimodal learning in action. How does this biological stuff actually play out in effective learning? And he starts with something surprising, the power of play.
Yeah, it's surprising because we often see play as, the opposite of serious learning, a distraction.
Right, stop playing and get back to work.
Exactly. But researchers like Brown and Vaughan argue play is embodied learning in its essence. It's this powerful form of multimodal simulation and empathy, and it's absolutely critical for cognitive development. Remember those rat studies by Diamond?
Broadly, the ones with the different cages.
Yeah. Rats in enriched environments, cages with rat toys, chances to socialize, they showed increased neuroplasticity, up to 25% more connections in their visual cortex. And they performed way better on cognitive tasks than rats in boring cages.
So play literally changed their brains.
Literally shaped the brain, fostering creativity, adaptability, empathy. It shows how dynamic, stimulating environments, full of playful exploration, drive development. Think about kids playing something complex like Pokemon.
Oh yeah, they know hundreds of characters, stats, types. It's amazing.
Right, and they're not just memorizing lists. They're intuitively learning dozens of characters, complex traits, powers, strategies through intense, playful competition. That's not rote learning. It's deeply embodied, intrinsically motivated learning, driven by that indomitable intention we talked about.
That's a fantastic example. And Olson builds on this idea of engagement with video games as masterful pedagogy. Again, something many might dismiss as just entertainment.
It's a common dismissal, but James G., a big name in educational research, powerfully refutes it. G. argues that good video games actually incorporate good learning principles. Why? Because they're fun, they're motivating, and they constantly push players right to the edge of their learning ability.
The challenge zone.
Exactly. They are largely self-directed learning spaces. And research consistently finds them significantly and consistently more effective than traditional methods for learning facts and developing higher-level skills like self-direction, complex problem-solving, critical thinking. Players aren't passive. They're active co-producers, customizing things, getting instant feedback, taking calculated risks, all within this well-designed challenge structure. It's learning by doing, embodied.
But Olson finds a gap even in G's analysis. He calls it the aesthetic blind spot.
Yeah, while G nails the cognitive benefits, Olson points out he kind of overlooks the critical aesthetic and cultural parts that make games so immersive and effective. It's the art, the colors, the character design, the evocative scenes, the sound design, the story, the emotional pull. All that stuff creates the aesthetic empathy that lets players suspend disbelief.
So the art isn't just window dressing. It's crucial to the learning.
Crucial. Games work as learning experiences because they are so sensory rich across the full aesthetic and cultural spectrum. They engage us on so many levels of perception and feeling. Olson uses Pixar as an example. The underlying code, the tech, has to serve the artistic vision. He argues Guy's oversight reflects this broader societal bias or myopia against the real value of aesthetics in education. We keep treating it as secondary, non-cognitive.
Which Olson clearly thinks is a huge mistake. And he backs up this whole multimodal approach with data, right? Multimedia's boost to learning.
Absolutely. It's not just theory. There's the multimedia principle from Richard Mayer. Basically, combining senses, like showing relevant images while someone is speaking, significantly reduces the cognitive load on your brain, makes it easier to understand and remember.
Less brain effort needed.
Exactly. And John Medina's research showed a striking difference. About 65% retention when information was presented visually and orally, compared to only 10% for just oral information.
Yeah, 65% versus 10%. That's enormous.
It really is. And think about YouTube again. Olson calls it a tremendously successful example of multimedia learning that flat out disputes traditional education's exclusive dominance of learning. Remember, that 86% using it to learn. From fixing sinks to advanced physics. It's proof of concept on a global scale.
YouTube as the ultimate multimedia textbook. And you mentioned meta-analyses, aggregating multiple studies.
Yeah, really compelling stuff. Fatal and Lemke did a big meta-analysis. They found that multimodal learning text plus visuals or audio boosts average student performance by 21 percentile points on basic skills tests compared to just traditional methods.
21 percentile points is significant.
Very. But here's the kicker. When interactive multimedia learning includes higher-order thinking skills analysis, synthesis, problem-solving, students saw an average increase of 32 percentile points in their ability to transfer those skills to new situations.
32 points for transfer skills. That's huge. That's the kind of learning we actually want, right? Applying knowledge.
That's the holy grail, really. And simulations, like in video games or virtual labs, also show big positive effects. They let students actively engage, explore, get immediate feedback in realistic ways. And Olson connects all this back to AI development, noting how AI is becoming increasingly multimodal and sensory motor, mirroring how we actually think and learn.
Okay, so learning is biological, embodied, multimodal. We see how play, games, and multimedia support this. How does MAE tie it all together as the big solution, the new educational meta framework?
This is where Olson really synthesizes everything. He argues that MAE, grounded in this understanding of embodied learning, can provide that missing piece. The coherent, evidence-based theory of learning that people like Nathan say is the central problem of education. Olson calls this foundation grounded embodied learning, or GEL. It connects everything back to how our bodies and minds naturally learn and thrive.
And it's not just tweaking the old system, it's inverting the traditional model, flipping it on its head.
Completely inverting it. MAE makes the embodied, constructivist, expansive aspects of learning now dominant and central. Remember that old model of force-feeding all the content up front?
Yeah, the 80% forgetting model.
Right. MAE flips it. Abstract content is delivered strategically as necessary. He uses the acronym SCRAN, contextually relevant, authentic, and necessary.
SRAN, I like that. So just-in-time learning, almost.
Exactly. And then it's routinely exercised in authentic situations. So yes, you might cover significantly less content in terms of sheer volume, which might freak out traditionalists.
Definitely. Covering the curriculum.
But the knowledge you do gain is much more deeply understood and lastingly retained. Olson argues this approach can fundamentally resolve that persistent achievement gap, not by more drilling, but by focusing on deep understanding and flexible application. Assessment changes, too. It's not a gatekeeper anymore, sorting students out. It becomes diagnostic, figuring out where you need help, not just labeling you a failure.
That sounds much more supportive. And this leads to Olson's core metaphor, MAE, as the societal nervous system of education. Can you unpack that a bit more? It's very organic sounding.
It's a really elegant and powerful vision. He states it flat out. Media arts is our society's central nervous system. Think about your own nervous system. It extends your senses, lets you perceive the world, make sense of it, and respond.
Right. Feel, see, react.
Olson says media arts does the same thing, but technologically. It extends our senses. It actively perceives and interprets the massive flow of information in our world, turning it into aesthetic meaning. And then it lets us respond to that meaning through all sorts of multimodal communications, designs, and interactive productions, all infused with that aesthetic empathy.
So learning becomes directly plugged into how society actually functions, communicates, understands itself.
Exactly. Learning and knowledge suddenly gain this vital relevance, meaning purpose, because they're not isolated in a classroom. They're integrated into real-world processes, how society works, talks, evolves.
So it's not just what we learn, but how we learn connects us to the world and lets us influence it.
Precisely. This meta-framework fosters what he calls a learning culture of holostasis. Remember, homeostasis was just balance. Holostasis is dynamic thriving. It propels students towards universal meta-learning, learning how to learn.
Becoming expert learners.
Yes. The classroom becomes an experiential constructionist laboratory. Students are in direct, living contact with knowledge as this active, evolving thing. They interact, collaborate, make stuff, create, explore, experiment, invent. The whole system isn't a rigid machine anymore. It's a living, evolving, cognitive network, constantly adapting with its learners, a continuous cycle of discovery.
And he contrasts this directly with the old model.
Yeah.
Right? In his flexible, empowering system comparison.
Yeah, he has this table in the book. It's a really stark comparison. MAE is biological, cognitive, naturalist, holistic. It's experiential, embodied, contextual, real world. It's flexible, accommodating, personalizing. It's aesthetic, cultural, creative, expansive, empowering.
And traditional education is.
Fixed, static, unreflective, a programmed machine. MAE, he stresses, is genuinely democratizing. It's low threshold, designed to be easy to get into even if you're a complete beginner. Universal design for learning, UDL principles, are just naturally embedded, multiple ways to engage, represent ideas, take action. It supports diverse learners, even allowing interaction through things like eye gaze or mind interfaces eventually, truly adapting to the learner.
That sounds like what he calls a pedagogy of potentiation. Unlocking potential, not just teaching facts.
Exactly, potentiation. It's designed to unleash limitless levels of personal learning. The goal isn't everyone retaining the same uniform content we know that's futile. The goal is each student achieving their highest degrees of understanding, skill, and high-order competency on their own path. Assessment is purely diagnostic, helping you get better, not acting as a punitive gatekeeper.
And students gain the ability to create anything.
Pretty much. To construct and simulate any conceivable object, environment, or experience. Imagine students making physics animations that actually show how forces work, or simulating the human body, or designing solutions for urban planning challenges. It connects their learning directly to real-world impact. They can tackle complex issues like AI ethics or journalistic standards because they're actively creating and simulating within those contexts. It builds those crucial higher-order skills: creativity, self-directed inquiry, real empathetic problem solving.
Okay, the theory is powerful, but Olson gives concrete examples, right? MAE in practice. Let's start with multimedia design in a foundational year. What does that actually look like?
Yeah, he describes this great low-threshold project called Composition 101. It sounds almost too simple. Students get 5 basic shapes: square, circle, triangle, line, dot, their task. Arrange them on a blank page in interesting versus boring ways.
Interesting versus boring. That's it.
That's the prompt. But it's not just about making pretty pictures. It quickly, almost intuitively, teaches fundamental artistic and critical thinking skills. Things like dynamic balance, contrast, variety, and that crucial idea of thinking outside the box. Olson says students are often just amazed by their own creative ability. They see the immediate visual result. They feel the difference between a balanced composition and an unbalanced one. They realize there are these hidden rules in creativity that evoke different feelings.
So they get hooked quickly because they see they can do it.
Exactly. That immediate success, combined with the open-ended challenge, hooks them. It's pure embodied learning. And beyond the specific tool sketching, digital drawing, maybe a simple web tool, they rapidly develop imagination, improvisation, divergent thinking, design thinking. They learn to take risks and, maybe most importantly, to embrace failure as just part of the design process. Iterate, try again.
Skills useful, way beyond art class.
Absolutely. Invaluable 21st century circumstances skills. Resilience, adaptability, innovation. And they learn to reflect, to talk about their choices. It lays the groundwork for understanding how media arts shapes cultural meaning through that aesthetic empathy.
Okay, great foundational example. Then he talks about yearbook journalism for an intermediate year. That sounds, well, like yearbook.
Yeah.
How is that a core pedagogical framework?
That's the genius of it. He shows how yearbook, especially when combined with multimedia journalism, maybe news broadcasting, becomes this central intersecting subject. It literally shapes the school's academic and cultural milieu. Students aren't just recording memories, they become active cultural agents.
Cultural agents, how?
They're tasked with inquiring, documenting, collaborating, translating all the raw stuff happening at school, sports, academics, clubs, just daily life into this memorable, enjoyable cultural memoir. It's not passive, it's holistic learning through production.
So how does making a yearbook foster emotionally centered, fully embodied cognition? That sounds pretty academic for yearbook.
It works because they are deeply interactive and empathic with their environment. They have to be. They attend events, they conduct real interviews with peers, teachers, staff, they gather tons of information. Then they have to figure out how to aesthetically organize it all, compelling graphic design, engaging news stories, maybe video segments, the technology, the cameras, the software. It becomes transparent.
Meaning they're not focused on the tech itself.
Right. Their focus shifts to connecting physically and crafting socioculturally valuable artifacts that actually reflect and shape their school's identity. They learn project management, deadlines, giving and receiving constructive feedback, synthesizing diverse information. It becomes this hub, this culture of learning, where other subjects suddenly become vital. Civics helps understand school governance for a story. Math helps manage budgets or page layouts. Language arts helps write killer headlines. It's all immediately relevant because they're using it to understand and shape their world.
That's a much richer view of yearbook than I ever had. Okay, final example. Embodying language through media arts, especially for ELD or ESL students. This is often a really tough area.
Huge challenge. And Olson paints a stark contrast. Think about traditional ESL classrooms. Often stressed teachers, lots of rote memorization of vocab lists, students coming and going, maybe a general feeling of disengagement. The curriculum can feel old, disconnected. Students struggle to use formal English outside that specific class. It can be dry, isolating, often just not very effective.
Yeah, I can picture that. So how does MAE turn that drudgery to immersion? What's the MAE approach?
He proposes building the ELD curriculum around a linguistically and multimodally diverse and experiential TV production course.
TV production for language learning.
Yeah. Instead of just reading sterile dialogues, ELD students actively analyze actual TV shows. Then they construct their own scripted versions, maybe short skits based on their own lives, their cultures, things relevant to them. This means they're collaboratively enacting, capturing, negotiating plot points, rehearsing lines, and reshooting dramatic scenes over and over until they get it right.
So they're using language in a really active, meaningful context.
Exactly. It creates this vibrant world of living language. English isn't some abstract subject. It's a dynamic tool they need to use to express themselves, to collaborate, to tell a story. More advanced students might even coach newer students on pronunciation or acting, which reinforces their own learning and builds community.
That sounds way more engaging than flashcard. And how does this build a culture of language, especially with AI support?
Well, this intensive linguistic experience naturally fosters a culture of language. Repetition isn't monotonous drilling, it's effortless because they're repeating lines during rehearsal, trying different ways to say things. They are constantly talking about characters, camera angles, plot problems, technical issues. Olson emphasizes they do almost all of the talking, which is absolutely critical for acquiring language fluency.
In the AI part.
Beyond the classroom activities, you integrate supplemental online apps and AI-based ELD support systems. These act as a cognitive extension, creating this addictive and immersive learning ecosystem. AI can track vocabulary, offer personalized practice, give instant feedback on pronunciation, even generate relevant dialogues. It helps accelerate language acquisition to its optimal effectiveness.
And the teacher's role changes.
Completely.
Yeah.
The teacher shifts from being the main source of content delivery to being a facilitator. They monitor a diagnostic dashboard, see where students need help, guide the process, manage the environment. It becomes this hyper-supportive system that's also less disrupted if students move in or out because the learning isn't strictly linear.
Wow. What a truly powerful journey through Dane Olson's vision. Okay, wrapping up this deep dive, it feels abundantly clear that MAE for Olson isn't just another subject. It's way more fundamental. It's biological. It's societal. It's a whole new way to think about learning.
Absolutely. MAE as this meta framework, this societal nervous system, it really does transform education from that rigid old factory model into something organic, adaptive, thriving, something that nurtures that indomitable intention to learn that Olson says is inside all of us. It recognizes learning as just fundamentally human.
And at its core, it really feels like it's about empowering you the learner,
Yeah.
right? Prioritizing learning how to learn meta-learning and self-development, giving students those crucial higher-order competencies so they can actually understand and use knowledge in the real world, which is always changing.
And that empowerment isn't just individual. It's about building a collective ability, maybe, to not just cope with our complex media world, but to actively shape it. It could change how we solve problems together.
Which leaves us with a really provocative final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Dane Olson says that embodiment, emotion, feeling, aesthetic meaning is the guiding rudder of reason. The rudder of reason.
Think about that.
So if media arts education, as Olson envisions it, is designed to cultivate this embodied aesthetic intelligence, integrating it into everything we learn, how might our collective thinking, our societal reasoning, our problem solving actually evolve? What amazing solutions, what new kinds of understanding might bubble up when our education system finally mirrors and extends our global digital consciousness? What happens when we raise a generation of truly techno-embodied learners and creators?